Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to the Standards Committee meeting on the 27th of January. Thank you very much for attending this evening. I will begin with the welcomes, actually. I'd like to welcome Councillor Bennett, who has joined the committee since its last meeting, and also welcome our three independent members for Standards, Amanda Rogers, Wendy Swinton Eagle and Paul Cummins. This is the first meeting of the new term of office, so thank you very much for joining us this evening. I'm going to move to the first point on the agenda, which is to appoint a new vice chairman. So I would like to propose Councillor Kennedy, and I would need a seconder, please, for Councillor Kennedy. Councillor Bennett.
I would be happy to second Councillor Kennedy.
Thank you very much. And I believe we need to vote on this decision, if I may. And you can vote on your touchpads, I believe. Is that everybody? Has everybody voted? Got a green? Yep.
Chair, that's 6 votes in favour, 0 votes against and no abstentions. That's a unanimous vote, Chair.
Fantastic, thank you. I'd like to welcome Councillor Kennedy to join me, please, if you may. If you'd like to accept, obviously.
Well, thank you very much. Always nice to have a unanimous vote.
It is, indeed, yeah. Thank you very much.
On one side.
Thank you. So item number 2 on the agenda is to receive apologies of absence. I'm aware of Councillor Webster and Councillor Denham St Pinnock as the 2 apologies for absence. Item number 3 is to consider any items that the chairman agrees to take as urgent business, and I have none. Item number 4 is to receive declarations of interest from members in any aspect, in respect of any matter on the agenda, sorry. If you could indicate whether you do have any declarations of interest in the room this evening. I don't see any. Thank you. And number 5 is to agree the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 18th of March 2024. Unless there's any points, I would just like to seek a verbal agreement, if that's okay, if you're all in agreement with those. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on to item number 6, which is the Standards Committee government consultation on strengthening the standards and conduct framework of local authorities. And I'd like to invite Edwina to introduce this, if I may.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, committee. The report before you is a consultation that has been introduced by the government, and the purpose of the consultation is to strengthen the standards and conduct framework for all local authorities in England. Members will be familiar with the Member Code of Conduct regime as it is. The Community on Standards in Public Life in the past has made about 16 recommendations to the government, one of which is that the government should look to strengthen the Code of Conduct, sanctions and the process, which is why this consultation was commenced. The recommendation is in paragraph 1, and I'm seeking today, as the monitoring officer, the view of the committee on the formal response which is attached as Appendix 1 to this report. I set out the background in paragraph 2, and I've also included a link to the consultation document. I will take it that members have read the document. However, just to highlight the key proposals set out in paragraph 2, it's a reintroduction of suspension powers. The old standards board used to have powers to suspend members, so the government is consulting on whether that should be reintroduced. The disqualification of repeat offenders, a right of appeal, a national appeals body. I won't go through the list because I'm sure members have read the documents and the report. So what we are seeking today is members' views on the proposed responses. As I said, is attached as Appendix 1. The proposed responses are the text in green, so that members can easily recognise the proposed responses. And I will leave it there and I will take questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And I think, just to say in brief, I consider this questionnaire to be important because of the way that, we as the Standards Committee really, have an understanding of the process and also to understand the clarity of the process as well. So I appreciate the work that has gone into this response. I think it's much needed, and it's actually, from my point of view, it's good to review. There are 40 questions here which cover a range of processes and criteria that I think are really important to the work that our committee are doing. So I'd like to express my thanks for that. Can I invite any further questions on these? Any other points on these questions? I think before we do that, I think if we accept, or once the discussion has happened, if we accept these questions in the whole, and that we can see any recommendations that come this evening from the committee, if we can see those recommendations or changes before they are sent off, would that be acceptable?
That is acceptable, Chair.
Great, thank you. So to open it up then, would anybody like to make any comment on the proposed answers that have been provided in the papers this evening? Or are you happy to accept? Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, Chairman. A few points actually. In question 13, we say that we get 8 complaints a year, but in 13A, the total, when it comes to the individual complaints and groupings, there's only 7. I don't know whether that was intentional or whether we could find a way of making that 8 as well. In question 14, should the answer to that actually be not applicable, because we're answering here as a council and not an individual? Am I correct in saying?
Yeah, please.
So I will answer question 14 first. So this is a response on behalf of the council as a whole, which would include officers as well. So that's why the answer to that was no if you currently work or have worked within local authority. Because we're answering as a council, not on behalf of an individual, the answer would have to be a no, unless I've misunderstood your question.
No, that's fine. It was just that later on we did put not applicable when there was a similar sort of question. No, I'm quite happy with that. Where are we? Question 25. Would there actually be circumstances when we would suspend someone from using the facilities rather than suspend them totally. Can we?
Yeah, please.
Yes, there could be circumstances where a member will be banned from using the premises. So, for example, where there is allegations of physical violence or sexual misconduct or fraud, those type of situations, that's when you would exclude a member from coming into the building. But it might be that it doesn't meet the threshold for disqualification because you have to take each case on its merits. So that's why that answer is the way it's been answered.
Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to read my own notes. Oh, yeah, the question 36. Do you consider that the complaint should give a right of appeal when an allegation of misconduct is not upheld? You say no, there shouldn't be a right of appeal. But in 39, I think we say that in both cases, if my understanding is correct, that in both cases there should be the right of appeal from the complainant and the person complained about.
So my reading of that, so number 36 has to do with just the complainant. Number 39 is just generally whether there should be a national appeals body. So in this case, so it would be for cases where there has been a decision that there has been a breach of code of conduct. That's the way I've read that. Because the initial part, if you kind of look at the way the questions are worded, there's sort of sequential. So 36 only deals with where there hasn't been an upholding of a misconduct. And then 38 then generally talks about a body that should hear appeals. And in that case, it should be for both the claimant and the elected member when there has been, in my view, a decision that there has been a breach. So for me, that's separate from where there hasn't been a breach, because 36 is quite specific for circumstances where there hasn't been a breach of misconduct.
Yeah, okay, no, it's just my reading of it was that in one question we're saying no, the claimant shouldn't have a right of appeal. Then in the 39, we're actually saying yes, both sides should have a right of appeal. But, you know, I'm quite happy with your interpretation if that's, you feel that's the way it is.
If the committee is happy, I can expand on the response to show clearly that the interpretation is both of the above should be in scope when there has been a decision of a breach. So it's quite clear. But the way I interpreted it was 36 was quite clear. It's dealing with a specific situation, and 39 deals with a separate set of circumstances.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Phillips. Did you have an earlier question that was yet to be answered?
I'm trying to decipher my notes. So if I can decipher it, if I may come back.
We'll come back, okay.
Apologies, yes, I should have answered that. The question was about 13 and 13A, the number of complaints. So 13 deals with the general number of complaints, and 13A, I believe, was to do with...
It categorises them.
Categorising for
I
this.
apologise, it's my accountant's training. One side should equal the other.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Phillips. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to say that broadly I welcome the thrust and direction of this consultation, that it is trying to strengthen the standards powers that this council and other councils would have. So although I'm newly on this committee as of today, I was on the standards committee from 2019 to 2023, and in that time, I think one of my frustrations was that there seemed to be very little sanction for when standards hadn't been upheld appropriately by elected members. And worse, it was a sort of a slap on the wrist and a suggestion that maybe you should go on some training to, be less angry or be less racist or whatever it was. And it felt that that wasn't really enough to reflect the true gravity of some of the standards complaints that I saw during that time. So I think in terms of your report, Edwina, on H, on empowering victims, this consultation seeks views on how to empower victims affected by councillor misconduct. What's important for me is that we put it back in our response to the consultation, that we want victims to feel confident that should they make a complaint and it's a valid complaint and it's upheld, there is reasonable sanction on that councillor as a result. And I can see, in terms of suspending councillors and so on, set out in the consultation, that there's some quite hefty potential consequences of having a standards complaint upheld against you. I wonder whether there should be something in between from the slap on the wrist through to the being fully suspended that is missing here. It feels like it's sort of a little bit binary, and I think maybe there's a need for some more intermediary measures. I wonder if any other members of the committee have got thoughts on what those might be. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. I think that's a really interesting point. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Edwina?
Yes, so I think the in-between would be the sanctions that we have now, which would be, for example, training, apologising, the sort of sanctions that we have at the moment, censure, that type of thing would be the in-between. I'm not sure that the government is looking to totally eradicate those sanctions. Okay. And what it's trying to do is strengthen what we've got now to basically make it have a bit of teeth. So that's how I've read all the consultation documents that have accompanied this. But if the committee is happy, I can make that very clear in our response, because there are 3 text boxes that I can put those sort of comments in.
Can I come back, please, Chairman?
Please.
I mean, would it be possible, as I remember it from 4 or 5 years ago, some of the sanctions were optional. It would be suggested that the councillor goes on training, not mandated. Is it possible? Is the government consultation proposing that it stays as suggested remediation, or is it getting strengthened?
So from the documents, it isn't clear whether the government's going to make it mandatory.
Yeah.
At the moment, they're just asking for our views. They'll come back with where they're going, and I don't know whether there'll be further consultation then, but whatever comes back from the government will be brought to this committee.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Phillips.
I may come back, Chair.
Please.
Very much. Yeah, I mean, in general, I would agree with Councillor Bennett that, I mean, in the past there have been instances where I felt the existing sanctions were pretty ineffective and didn't really get the message across to members that, their actions were inappropriate, and a period of suspension I personally felt would have been appropriate. So in general, yes, more than happy that that would be. I realised what the question was, having read my notes several times. Question 32, we say there isn't a case for immediate disqualification, but if it was very obvious that there had been physical violence, it happened in a council meeting or outside, and members of the council, officers had seen what would happen, is there not a case in that situation for immediate disqualification?
Thank you, Councillor Phillips. That's a really good question. And question 32 actually did tax me a bit because the way that the question is worded, it suggests that there has been an investigation and a decision made. And my view was, by the time you get to an investigation and make a decision, it should be the final decision. It's kind of suggesting that that's not the final decision, and that's what I struggled with, because there are other places in the questionnaire that talks about being able to have an interim suspension. So you could basically, suspend a member in the interim. But question 32 wasn't that clear, and that's why I went for that answer, no. I did debate whether to go for yes, but it's not that clear, and my view is, by the time you're making a decision, that should be the final decision. So, I hope I explained myself properly. I'm happy, it's something that I did grapple with, as to whether it's a yes or no, but it's the question's not that clear. Maybe I've misread it.
No, I must admit, I'm of the same opinion. It's a difficult one to answer.
Thank you, Councillor Phillips. Yeah, I think it appears there's a flow to these questions that are kind of an ongoing sequential set of responses, I think, to different actions, I think. Thank you. Anybody else have any points? Yes, sorry. Councillor, not Councillor, Amanda Rogers.
Yeah. Thank you, Edwina, for a lot of thought and consideration has obviously gone into this, and I just had one or two points of clarification, really. The first one is question 10, our old friends, the vexatious complainants. I just wanted to have a brief word with you, further thought about it. I was slightly concerned about the notion of keeping a list and the implications of that in itself, GDPR, who gets to see who's on the list, where is the list kept, how long are you on the list for. I think that opens up a whole nother thing that you may well have already thought through. More generally, I think the complainants are always going to say they've got fresh evidence. Of course, they've always got fresh evidence. So it might be something about saying that we will not reinvestigate matters that have already been investigated and come to a conclusion. And then that, of course, brings us back to points 35 and onwards about appeals. For me, that sort of flowed. So I'm just jumping to question 35, where we're suggesting that, and I know Councillor Phillips has already raised this one, that the complainant should have a right of appeal when a decision is taken not to investigate. We're suggesting the answer to that is no. But I would suggest that perhaps reasons are given to that complainant, written reasons are given as to why. And it's going to be, isn't it, that the behaviours or the incidents just don't meet the threshold, wouldn't stand scrutiny at a higher, in the High Court or further up the chain. But I think that would at least need to be explained to the complainant. And then again, sorry if I'm covering ground Councillor Phillips has covered, questions 37 and 38 are saying then that we do think there should be a right of appeal, but to a national body. Hang on, and then 39, if you think there is a need for an external national, do you think it should hear both the elected members should have a right of appeal where they have been suspended or disqualified. Claimants should have a right of appeal in significant cases of misconduct. There needs to be a balance so tribunal is not overwhelmed with cases and councils spending already stretched resources defending appeals. I would amplify that actually, that it really can all become quite an industry, can't it? You know, about appeals and appeals about the outcome of the appeal. So that's why I think we should perhaps emphasise a clear shift, that if we've done our bit, the outcome has been found and has been communicated to everybody. They don't like it, they go to the national body. But there's got to be, I think, for everybody, that right to the national body, because it's sort of like a service-based complaint going to the ombudsman, isn't it? They're going to go to the ombudsman. That's where they can go next. So I think it would get very complicated if we were saying some people can, but some people can't. Everybody needs to be able to go to the national body. It would then be for the national body to say, we're not looking at this one, we're not looking at that one. But at least we have, at district level, set out next steps that everybody is entitled to.
Thank you, Amanda. Would you like to come back?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I quite agree with you about question 39. So the response there is really for the government to consider when setting up an appeal body, that appeal body has the powers basically to maybe have some sort of merits test, for example, with judicial review. Before you carry on to judicial review claim, you go through the permission stage. So something similar to that, you know, the appeals sort of initially assessed as to whether or not it merits a full hearing. So that's the wording of that. You mentioned the issue of vexatious complainants. Yes, it can be tricky in the sense that if you've got a list of vexatious complainants, I do take your point about GDPR, but that's something that the council is very, very cognizant of. Our GDPR duties, it would probably be limited to the MO and, you know, maybe anyone supporting the MO, the DM, and, you know, people like that. But there has to be a balance, because you have complainants who incessantly complain about either several issues or one particular issue. But it's a balancing exercise. As the MO, you're quite familiar. I don't make decisions on my own. I will consult the independent person before kind of saying, well, you know, this is vexatious. So it would have to be tested, and it would have to be merits-based. It's not a straightforward case of, oh, you know, they're vexatious, and that's the end of that. But there will be real guards surrounding any decisions that I make. So, but there has to be a balance that, you know, people are not just sort of making 40 complaints or, you know, endless complaints. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll come back to you, Amanda, and then I'll go to Paul, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. The first point I wanted to make is, you know, broadly, you know, supportive. Obviously, it's not my role to agree, but as the independent person, supportive of the responses. But I suppose Amanda stole my thunder a little bit in question 35. I thought if a complainant should have a right of appeal, just for the fact that if you know, a complainant is told no, we're not going to investigate, that they will write to the ombudsman, etc., which potentially will make a matter drag on. Whereas if we had an appeal mechanism, it would allow, you know, the person to, I suppose they'd have two chances. But I think as well, just knowing how services like the ombudsman work, they tend to want the local authority to, you know, look again at issues. So very much echoing what Amanda said in relation to that one. Thank you.
If I may just add, I think this comes down to possibly the threshold of when the appeal is taken, when the complaint is taken to the next level. So I guess, would you like to add anything, Edwina, on that threshold?
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. That's a really good question. As you're aware, initially, the initial assessment, it's a really low threshold. So, and like I said earlier, when a monitoring officer is assessing the initial threshold. It's not done just on our own. We will come to you as the independent person. So my view was, or still is, that if a decision has been taken not to investigate, it's not a case of you've submitted a complaint and immediately I just pat it back. I'd have actually assessed against the initial threshold, one of which would be, was the member acting in the official capacity? Is there a potential breach here? And those sort of things would have gone on, and I'd have consulted one of your one of the three of you before that decision is made. So it's in my view robust enough that should be the end of that. Otherwise, we're talking about a national body. I see this becoming like maybe the old tribunal for code of conduct complaints, and that can be very, very resource demanding on local authorities, who then have to prepare cases and answer these cases, when in actual fact, you know, it's been tested against the initial threshold. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Did you want to have another point, Amanda?
Yes, and in fact, that last point that...
Oh, if you could just press your microphone.
Yes, and in fact follows on, I think hopefully quite well from the final point that Edwina's made there. And it was more of a question about this national external body and their jurisdiction and power or right of censure over a local authority. I guess what I'm comparing it to the role of an ombudsman's office, you know, if there is an ombudsman's finding against a local authority, as we all know, that is awful. Senior officers want to just fall down a hole. It's terrible having an ombudsman's finding against it. So is it going to be that there's now this other body that will find against the particular local authority, and then it's a nightmare for everybody? There's a huge reputational issue. I just wonder sort of what their jurisdiction is really.
Would you like to add?
The answer is at the moment, we don't know. The government are consulting on this and they'll come to some sort of decision. The way I thought about it in my head was the old kind of standards regime where, you know, it was sort of a tribunal. That's what I'm envisaging. I might be totally wrong. I don't know. I'm just thinking the consultation and the questions seem very similar to what the old standards board used to do. So, but I might be wrong. I don't know the answer now.
Thank you. Anybody else like to make a comment before we just conclude? No? Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for your participation in that and for asking some really good questions on those responses. Okay, I will just clarify the recommendation. And as I just said at the beginning, we will recommend that the Standards Committee have given their view on the monitoring officer's formal council response on the proposed responses to the consultation, and that we will see the final set of recommendations before they're sent off. And I would need a proposer for this, please. Thank you, Councillor Phillips, and a seconder, please. Councillor Kennedy, the second. Thank you very much. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. We need to now vote on that. So if you would vote with your touchpads, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. There are 8 votes in favour, no votes against and no abstentions. That's a unanimous vote and it's carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so moving to agenda item 7, which is the Member Code of Conduct complaints procedure. And again, if I may invite Edwina to introduce the report as MO.
Thank you, Chair. So the report before you is really sort of asking the committee to discuss the council's current procedure for addressing the code of conduct complaints and make recommendations if you wish for any improvements to be made. A few members have expressed this evening the sanctions contained in our present code of conduct, whilst there are certain sanctions that by law cannot be included in any member code of conduct, but there may be some that perhaps this committee wants to discuss this evening. The other issue that I wanted to highlight to the committee is found in paragraph 15 at the meeting in March in 2024. David Horn, who was one of the council's independent persons at the time, made some comments, and those comments have not been implemented because we have a yearly constitutional review, and the meeting took place after that last year's constitutional review. So the constitutional review is coming around this year, and as a monitoring officer, all those recommendations will be put before the constitutional review group for consideration and final recommendation to the council. So those are just the issues that I wanted to highlight. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Edwina. Okay, I would like to invite any comments from independent persons first, if there are any. If not, I will ask councillors. Amanda, would you like to press your...
Yes, it's a very small point actually, and certainly overall endorsing the recommendations that were made by my predecessor last year, but just in 15.2, that the papers will include the monitoring officer's written advice and include the view of the independent person. I just wanted to make sure that is emphasised and that it is not a sort of binary option for the independent person to have either agreed or disagreed with the monitoring officer. I think it should not be that, but the opportunity for the independent person to have expressed some free text. As certainly, experience shows you can agree with the monitoring officer in that you know they are right and they know the law, but actually there's something else going on that you'd like to say. So it's not a binary situation.
So possibly some narrative around that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, we can note that, thank you. Anybody else like to make any comment on item 7 on the agenda? Okay, in that case, I will read the recommendation out, in that the Standards Committee is asked to discuss the Council's current procedure for addressing the Code of Conduct complaints and make recommendations to the monitoring officer of the committee, if the committee considers that improvements could be made. And again, I need a proposer, please. Councillor Sweatman, thank you. And a seconder? Councillor Kennedy? Thank you very much. And we need to vote to accept those recommendations, please. We've got 8. Everybody in? Yeah, thank you.
8 votes in favour, no votes against, and 0 abstentions.
Did you want to speak?
No.
Oh, you're voting.
Sorry, I'm confused. We're supposed to have done something.
Oh, no, I think you have. I think we've got everybody's votes. Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Okay, so we have accepted those recommendations. Thank you. Item 8 on the agenda is the Standards Committee Annual Report. And again, please, I'd like to invite Edwina to present the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. This report is the annual report that comes to the Standards Committee, as one of your remit is to maintain good standards with members. You will note in the report that this year there have been 7 complaints, but in actual fact there have been 3 complaints against 3 separate councillors. So the complaint set out in paragraphs 5 and 6 is against one member to do with an incident, but there were 5 complaints that came out of that one incident. The Constitution does allow the monitoring officer to treat several complaints as one, but in the interest of fairness, the complaints were dealt with separately, but really it's one incident. And then there were 2 further, before I move on to the other 2, those complaints have now been concluded in the sense that no finding of breach was found and no further action was taken. But the member was, there were recommendations kind of given to the member about the conduct complained about. I'll then move on to the 2 other complaints. One was made against a parish councillor and a town councillor. So just to separate that, the 5 complaints were against a member of the council, and then the other 2 one against a parish councillor and one against a town councillor. The town councillor complaint had to do with an email that had been sent to the member who'd complained and others, and that was dealt with by way of an apology. The subject member of the complaint agreed to apologise, and no further action was taken because it's not in the best interest of taxpayers to investigate. The fact speaks for itself. They've apologised and the matter was concluded. However, the 3rd complaint against a parish council, that's ongoing and has not been concluded. That complaint was made fairly recently, but at some stage it would be concluded. I will say that with all the complaints, independent persons were consulted all through, so it wasn't just a decision of the monitoring officer. And yes, those are the only things I wanted to highlight. Sorry, I do apologise. Actually, there's one more thing I wanted to say. From experience and having been in quite a few local authorities, because I interim, that's a really low level of complaints. That the authorities that have really significant number of complaints. So I think, whilst it may seem that, okay, there were 8 complaints, but in fact, like I said, there were 3 complaints. And I think that that's something that the Standards Committee should be sort of aware of, that the conduct of members, it's not such that you maybe need to start looking at amending, the code of conduct, or that there is a culture of really bad behaviour in this authority. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you very much, Edwina. I think that's rather encouraging to know that our level of complaints are relatively low, which is very much appreciated and good to hear. And I think it's also good to see the process being followed, and for us as a committee to see the progress on those as well. Can I invite any comments from independent persons, if you have any? If not, no, thank you.
Ignore it if it's not particularly. If my comment is not particularly helpful, then just ignore it. But I'll just add to what Edwina's observation about the number or level of complaints, as saying perhaps there is something to just be mindful of about does everybody know how to complain, that they can complain, that they should complain? You know, it maybe there is a healthy level of complaints.
That's a very good point, Amanda, thank you. Any other comments at all from anybody?
Yes, can I just?
Yeah, Councillor Kennedy?
Thank you very much, Chair. This is a cosmetic thing, I think, but just for the sake of clarity, I think it's worth saying in paragraph 7.2, the complaint against a parish councillor, it's very clear in paragraph 7.1 that complaint has been dealt with and concluded. But I think it might be worth just saying at the very end of 7.2 that this investigation or this matter is ongoing, because at the moment it's just left in the air. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kennedy. Okay, thank you. I don't see... Oh, sorry, Councillor Bennett.
That's okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Edwina. That's a kind of really interesting summary and encouraging that complaint levels look in the last year or so that they've been low. And actually, you sort of preempted what I was going to ask you, which was how does this compare in your experience to other authorities? But you've answered that already. So it's good to have that kind of context. In terms of the complaint that was actually 5 complaints, was that 5 complaints made by 5 individuals, or was it 5 different complaints of different types of misconduct made by like 1 or a couple of people, if that makes sense? I think that's sort of an interesting thing in terms of quite what's going on there, where there was a big group of people all unhappy with a particular councillor, or one person who was deeply unhappy across a number of factors. And then to Amanda's point about whether people know about complaining, it comes back to what I said previously in the meeting, you know, about whether victims are willing or think it's worth making a complaint. So not only do they know there's a process there, but do they think there's any point to it? So I certainly think that in the world of social media, there's all sorts of things that you could, could put a complaint in about. And I personally am choosing not to when sort of things are said about me that I know are not true and do not comply with the Nolan principles of honesty. But I think, you know, is it worth a member of the public who thinks that councillors are not behaving appropriately putting in a complaint, and how can we, you know, encourage that to happen?
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. That's a good point. Would you like to respond?
Thank you for both questions. It's quite unusual for local authorities to do anything else apart from put on their website how to make complaints. I think one of the things that could encourage people to make complaints is if there are decision of breaches, if those are published, the members of the public will see that, okay, there have been decisions made and these have been published. So apart from those 2 things, I'm not sure what else. We work quite closely with our parish and town council, so they're quite aware, you know, of how to contact myself as a monitoring officer. And sometimes I get, for example, calls or emails, but they don't meet the threshold. So, for example, a member who's, someone's complained about their behaviour, but it's in their personal capacity. You know, for example, 2 neighbours, they're not acting as a councillor at that moment, it's just a neighbour to a neighbour. The code of conduct doesn't give me jurisdiction over that. So that you know, sort of complaints like that, and some people as well, they might call about a complaint that took place several years ago. I haven't got jurisdiction for more than sort of 6 months at the most, if I kind of wanted to stretch, and maybe 12 months, and even that I'd have to justify why I've gone that far. So I do think from experience, most people know how to complain, but I think at the heart of it is what you said, that perhaps members of the public think, is it worth complaining maybe there's that element, and I think that's why the government is trying to correct that situation with the consultation. Thank you.
Thank you, Edwina. Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, following up on Amanda's point, I do think the general level of behaviour, not just at Mid-Sussex, but, you know, throughout the towns and parishes is generally pretty good. But I am aware of instances where people probably felt justified in making a complaint and possibly had reason to make complaint, but they chose not to because they felt the sanctions that were being handed down were made the process a waste of time. So I think there are instances where complaints might have been made but haven't been, but not an excessive number.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Phillips. Wendy, you have...
Sorry, can I just ask a
Question. Am I right in thinking that the only way that members of the public can find out about the complaints procedure is on the website, and the results are on the website? Is there any other general method that they are informed about how it works?
Do you mean any complaints in general or things that they have specifically complained about? Do you mean,
I mean, if
is
they
there
wish
a
to
public...
make a complaint, going back to Councillor Bennett and several people's questions, what is the general, what is the usual way of people being able to find out the process? Do they have to go to the website? Is the information published anywhere else, is what I'm trying to say.
If I may hand to Edwina.
So at the moment, it's usually on the council's website, and the parish and town councils will have the website as well. But like I said, I have had instances where people have called me up. So for example, if someone calls me and talks about an issue, I will actually email them a copy of the complaints process. But like I said, some of the calls that I've received, they're for things that happened years ago or don't meet the threshold. So apart from the council's website and parish council's website, if someone calls me or calls the customer services, they will be told how to make the complaint, or in interaction with officers of the council. So for example, if one of the officers is grass cutting or whatever, and a member of the public has a conversation with them, they will tell them as well, oh, this is how you can make a complaint. So that's sort of usually the ways in which we pass on the information.
I'm just wondering whether people might not feel a bit intimidated. How do they know who you are necessarily and what your role is if they are essentially, you know, not savvy about how councils work?
So if the court customer services, for example, and said, I'm not happy with so-and-so councillor, the customer service officer will say to them, oh, you need to speak to the monitoring officer, and they'll pass them through to me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if I see no more comments, no more hands, then I will just note, actually, before I move on. So the recommendations here are to note the contents of the report. So I think we will just have a verbal agreement on that, that everybody has noted that report. We don't need to vote on that, if that's okay. Great, thank you very much. So moving to the final points on the agenda are for questions pursuant to Council Procedure, Rule 10.2, of notice which has been given, and there are none. So with that, I will close the meeting at 7:54, and thank you very much for your attendance this evening. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.